Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. Those that joined us this morning, thank you for rejoining us. Hope you enjoyed your lunch, and those that are this is your first session of the day. Thank you for getting involved. If you're unfortunate to miss any of the sessions this morning, they will be recorded and made available to you. My name is Chris Chandler, Microsoft Alliance Manager here at Grey Matter, and it's my distinct pleasure of topping and tailing Justin's session this afternoon, focused on re-architecting for Azure and a smarter way to deploy.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the sunshine wherever you are. My name is Justin Davies. I'm the business group lead for application innovation at Microsoft in the UK. That basically means that anything which is PaaS-based, so Kubernetes, Azure App Service, serverless functions, integration services, as well as GitHub and DevOps, Azure DevOps, I look after essentially. Really what I want to talk to you today about is the services that we have in Azure, what we consider as Microsoft in terms of why people would use them, how you ship your code into Azure, the best ways of doing it, the reasons why you'd use one service versus another. I really just kind of want to set it out as to what those options are for you. So first of all, it all starts with developers. Microsoft being over 40 years old, we are a software company. We were started by software developers for software developers, and that kind of is still the ethos of Microsoft. Whenever we develop software, and I come from a software development background, when you start developing software, really the thing which you really want to think about is, I've got a really cool feature or a functional requirement that needs to be implemented, and I want to get that into production as quickly as possible, in the safest way possible to be able to do that. Sorry about that. Okay. So it really all starts with developers, and when we talk about developers and how they actually carry out their work, it really comes down to developer velocity. With developer velocity, what we're talking about is allowing developers to be able to build in the most productive way possible, to be able to collaborate with other developers. And once you've actually deployed your software, how you actually scale that as well. Now, surprise, surprise, Microsoft has an answer for all of these. And I really want to run you through those in terms of going from shifting left to right, going into the platform itself. So let's start with build productively. From a development tooling perspective, we have a number of services that we offer. Visual Studio Code, which is essentially the open source text editor for application development. I'm a big fan of it, and over 50% of people who were surveyed in the Stack Overflow Developer Survey of 2019 also kind of agree with that as well. 31% said that they really like Visual Studio and what it offers as well. And I think Giles also demonstrated Visual Studio Online as well. So really when it comes to just editing code and working with code itself, we've been doing Visual Studio for years. We have written programming languages, we have written frameworks, we have, we've really kind of got at the forefront of our mind when we're working with developers is really how do we make developers' lives as easy as possible. And so some of the new features which are in Visual Studio, like the IntelliCode, which is based on reams and reams and reams of source code to be able to help you code more efficiently and faster. The ability to be able to live share and to integrate with GitHub as well in terms of when you're doing coding with peers, as well as I said, Visual Studio Online. And then also, some of the other things that we've been talking about recently. There was a great blog article which came out a couple of days ago, where Microsoft has trained an AI model to essentially look at source code and figure out whether there's a bug or a security issue with that, and we'll be releasing that as open source. This is not something like we just release a piece of software or like Visual Studio Code and think job's done. We're always trying to make the life of a developer as easy as possible. Visual Studio IntelliCode, it really allows you to be able to do code completion, allows you to be able to intelligently be able to figure out what you actually want to be able to write for your code, so you're not copying and pasting everywhere, and really allows you to be able to push those best practices, the way that you're actually doing development, and codify it to be able to make your life as simple as possible. So that simplicity, that ability to be able to actually increase developer velocity within the text editor itself, where they're doing most of the work, is critical for us, because we want that, the ability to be able to shift from what's on your desktop or your laptop into production as quickly as possible. With Visual Studio Live Share, if you're buddying up with someone from a development perspective, or they want, you're asking for help in terms of a feature that you're working on, the ability to be able to share your screen, to be able to say, to be able to get one of your peers to be able to help, and especially in these times when people are fully working remotely rather than side by side, really allows people to be able to be more efficient as well. So the ability to be able to see the code that you're working on, and split your screen, and then see the code of your colleague as well, to be able to fix an issue, or to be able to actually buddy up and code together, is something which over the past 10 years has been a critical way of being able to develop software as efficiently as possible. And then Visual Studio Online. So I know we've got a screenshot here of VS Online working on a tablet or an iPad, but really the ability for people to just have access to their integrated development environment, also to their source code, as well as their toolings as well. It again allows you to be able to have that level of efficiency that has been quite difficult in the past. And the fact that most of VS Code is based on a web framework has actually made it quite easy for us to be able to shift that online, and again, just make life as easy as possible. And you get all of the features that you usually would do with Visual Studio as well, Visual Studio Code, but just in an online format. So when we start thinking about collaborate globally and securely, it really shouldn't be any surprise that I'm going to mention GitHub. I think I've been using GitHub for years now, and I think most developers, regardless of whether you're using Microsoft first-party development tools and frameworks, or whether you're a pure open source house, GitHub is the one source to be able to collaborate, whether openly with open source software, or to be able to collaborate with people within your own organization. There's this idea that whilst source code repositories have been around for eons, the ability and the way that you actually collaborate when you're writing code together is something which really has come to the forefront as being an efficient way with GitHub. The whole idea of pull requests, the ability to be able to have people comment on your pull request and your changes as well, really allows, and the way that I frame it to kind of non-technical people, is GitHub is like a social network for developers, and the thing which binds them together is the source code themselves. And to me, as a developer, it doesn't get much kind of purer than that, that the source code is the thing that binds people together. When you look at the numbers with GitHub, and when I first presented this slide after the GitHub acquisition, I think the number was 36 or 38 million developers, and this has now moved up to 40 million developers. I will be quite honest. I think when Microsoft acquired GitHub, I think Twitter went into meltdown with regards to this, and I think a lot of people were concerned that Microsoft is going to destroy GitHub, and this is not going to be good news for open source developers. I used to look after the open source business before my current role, so I have a lot of experience in terms of open source development and working with the open source community. I think there is an element of people worrying about Microsoft and open source based on historically what we've said about open source, but I can say categorically, as somebody who's been an open source developer for over 20 years, and somebody who now works at Microsoft, open source is ingrained within Microsoft. By default, we are allowed to open source whatever we want, as long as it doesn't contain Microsoft intellectual property or a partner's intellectual property. Nearly every Microsoft employee is allowed to have a GitHub account and is able to open source whatever they want. And so we use it for most of the open source projects that we develop in Microsoft. So Visual Studio Code is totally within GitHub, for example. We see it as being a critical enabler for developers. So previously, when I talked about kind of the editors, we're really about being where the developer is on their laptop or on their desktop. We're now shifting further right in terms of, well, how do you collaborate? How do you store that source code? And how do you work efficiently together? And when we look at kind of the innovation side of things, and this is where I spend most of my time, is helping customers to be able to innovate from a business perspective and also from a technology perspective. The things which actually impact developers is, well, or companies, is that it's actually quite difficult to get hold of good developers. Lots of people now are learning to be able to code. They're coming out of university understanding JavaScript, understanding .NET, for example, or C#. But actually having people with a lot of experience is actually quite difficult to be able to get, because good people usually stay at companies that they like working at, and that they like having challenges thrown at them where they can actually work on them. The other thing as well, a huge proportion of code bases include open source software. So I'm a Node.js developer by trade originally, and everything that I write on the shoulders of giants in terms of other people that have developed software. So, and all of that software is existing NPM packages which have been pulled in into my source code development, and I basically use all of that open source software. And then the other thing as well is that, and we go through this a lot with customers, is they want to adopt DevOps. And obviously, DevOps being the intersection of people, process, and tools. You're not just talking about the tooling, making everything up. You're not just talking about the people. You're talking about all three of them working together to have the DevOps culture within an organization. And GitHub really is one of those tools that allows that collaboration. And GitHub is the home of open source software development. And the other thing, which I think that people miss when we talk about GitHub, is the fact that actually nearly every skilled developer at some point or another, or who just has that inclination, has contributed to open source software. So there's a huge amount of developers on GitHub where you can go and view their source code, view what they've written to be able to solve a specific problem, and actually figure out, well, yes, that is a very elegant way of being able to do that. And so it's actually, you can actually use GitHub just by looking at the source code as a way to be able to learn and to be able to upskill yourself as well. So from a GitHub perspective, really from Microsoft and GitHub working together now, we're really trying to push the idea. I mean, GitHub had collaboration signed up already. They started to work on the security side of things. So how do you do scanning of source code? How do you make sure that you don't have backdoors which have been put into that source code as well? And how do you alert people that they put a secure key within their source code, for example, as well as then things like DevOps. So not just hosting your repositories and actually collaborating, but things like GitHub Actions as well, which I think Richard probably went through already earlier on today. And GitHub really figures out all of those problems and allows you to be able to just go on a per seat basis and say, or actually for free if it's open source, or if you're using a private repository, allows you to be able to say, just fix this problem for me, because as a developer, I just want to write my own code. From a collaboration perspective, I won't dwell on this too much because I've already talked about it, but really the idea of pull requests is something which is novel with GitHub, and they came up with the original idea, the ability to be able to just have people comment and accept changes into the Git tree themselves is brilliant. It's just a fantastic way from a developer mindset perspective to be able to actually collaborate together. When we look at the security alerts which have been added in now by some of the acquisitions that GitHub have made, being able to say that a requirement that you have within your application actually has an issue with it or is totally clean, it just allows you to have that single pane of glass to be able to say that is everything which is included within my application secure and ready to be able to go. The other thing as well is that when we start looking at open source repositories and the ability to be able to look at your code, which is in your private repositories, we have full coverage from what you're working on privately to what you're pulling in publicly as well. And yeah, if you're a user of Azure DevOps, you'll understand how easy the integration between both GitHub and Azure DevOps is. The ability just to be able to say, link in with my GitHub account and start using a GitHub repository for all of your source code storage, and using Azure DevOps for all of your pipeline work and your testing and so on and so forth. Obviously, if you don't want to use Azure DevOps, you can use you can use Jenkins, or if you want to use GitHub pipelines, you can use that. GitHub Actions, you can use that as well. Microsoft didn't acquire GitHub to be able to say everything must run on Azure and everything must run with Microsoft. We'll probably make it as easy as possible to be able to integrate, but that element of having GitHub being independent is still there and will be critical for its success moving forward, and to be able to actually make sure that it fulfills the promise that it originally came up with, which was to make developers' lives as easy as possible. So let's move on to scaling innovation now. So you've written your code in your VS Code or Visual Studio editor. You've done some collaboration now in terms of working with multiple developers on that code. And now really what you want to start looking at is deploying this onto Azure itself. So from an Azure perspective, sorry, 1 second, I just need to cough before I carry on. So from an Azure perspective, we have 54 regions worldwide in nearly, I think, pretty much every continent now around the world. We have over 90 compliance certifications as well. And we, as Microsoft, when we built Azure, we built it with the customers, our existing customers in mind. So our understanding of the enterprise space, the understanding of security, of operationalizing your IT infrastructure, of what good looks like when you're in production has really kind of been woven into Azure as a platform itself. We spend an awful lot of money on our data centers. We spend an awful lot of money on spinning up data centers in places which are quite harsh because that's where our customers are, and that's where they need to be able to have our points of presence for them to be able to actually carry out their work. From a compliance perspective, we have both global, regional, industry aligned compliance certifications. So HIPAA, for example, in healthcare, or FINRA when we come to finance, for example. And we work really closely both with our customers and the regulators within those regions as well to make sure that if a customer needs a certain certification for a workload to exist on Azure, we'll work with the customer and the regulator to be able to actually move that forward. So Azure, just like any cloud provider, is not static. We innovate where we see innovation is needed for our customers, but we listen to our customers and to industry as well to make sure that when you put your workloads on Azure, it is fit for purpose for you and will be resilient and scalable for the foreseeable future for those workloads to be able to exist. So from an Azure perspective, and things which really kind of fall underneath the applications or app innovation banner within Microsoft, we've got quite a large mix here. If we look at the edge, first of all, Azure Stack, which is kind of like Azure in a box that you can put into your own data center. Azure Sphere, which is a small, you can think of it as like an IoT device running Linux for you to be able to run your applications on. Azure Connect, HoloLens, Azure Arc as well, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail later. When we talk about serverless, I think it's a bit of a misnomer on this slide specifically. Actually, what we're talking about is PaaS services. So the customer's not having to worry about servers rather than serverless, the concept as Azure Functions. But from a serverless or a no compute perspective, we have services for your web apps, Azure App Service, mobile, Azure Mobile Service, mixed reality, so the HoloLens work that we do, the ability to run containers pretty much everywhere in Azure, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later. Events and integration, so Service Bus, Event Hub, the standards type of enterprise integration services that you would need. We have those also as PaaS services as well, allowing you to worry about writing code and allowing us to be able to worry about how that gets integrated and how that gets scaled for you as well. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail later about our PaaS databases and our AI machine learning, but also the ability to be able to do web scale analytics, literally shoving as much data as you possibly can within Azure and allowing us to be able to analyze that for you, to be able to see trends and insights that may be quite difficult when you're working on premise, for example. And then we start moving on to things like Internet of Things, so the ability to be able to have remote sensors, to be able to move data from lorries, transportation, logistics into Azure for use into your backend applications, as well as then things like content delivery networks, media streaming, those types of things are all there as services that you could pretty much for all of those write those yourself, but why bother? It really comes down to if you have a functional requirement, worry about the functional requirement. Don't worry about everything else that goes around it. That's really the whole idea behind PaaS. It's not just a case of not having to worry about infrastructure. It's actually a case of those services have been built for best in breed. They have been built to be as scalable and as resilient as they are needed for you, rather than you having to worry about, okay, we need to scale up 1 VM to 10 VMs. We need to worry about the load balancing. We need to worry about deploying the software. We need to worry about patching the infrastructure. All of those things are taken care of for you in our PaaS services. And then obviously that doesn't take away infrastructure as well. We still have the standard compute, networking, storage, security, and identity as well. And I'll kind of drill down into security and identity for a moment. When we start thinking about cloud, and this is applicable to all cloud providers, not just Microsoft, it's not just the compute element, it's not just the PaaS element of it as well. It really comes down to what's the best architecture for what I'm trying to develop. It comes down to how do I secure what I've deployed, and how do I integrate with my backend identity management system? How do I make sure that the identity of Joe Bloggs, when they're on premise, is actually flowing through into my application when it's running on cloud as well? So all of those kind of hybrid elements and all of those operational elements, we have those other services as well that kind of wrap around the applications as you deploy them. So Azure Arc is one of those really interesting services. When you look at it from a 10,000 foot view, it's pretty boring. When you start getting into the weeds of it, it's actually really pretty exciting in terms of what we're trying to do here. When we talk to customers, one of the things that we said, and we totally get it, people don't always go with a single cloud provider. People don't always shut down their on-premise systems or their data centers and move everything over to Azure. The idea is that people will actually want to be able to manage their infrastructure in the same way that they manage their cloud infrastructure, as in being software defined and having that single pane of glass to be able to see what are my virtual machines, what have they been tagged with, what resource groups are they in, and the ability to be able to manage all of your infrastructure as if it was running in Azure. That is essentially what Azure Arc is. And the complexities behind this, the ability for us to be able to manage a virtual machine in the same as if it was in Azure, but that virtual machine being hosted in Google Cloud or AWS, for example, or on premise or on VMware, is something which just allows customers to not have to worry about one other extra thing. The thing which excites me about Azure Arc is the ability to actually run Azure services on other clouds and on premise or in your data center. So if I wanted to run SQL Server, if I wanted to run PostgreSQL or MySQL, for example, then actually I could run those, and all of the licensing and billing is actually taken care of my enterprise agreement, but the software is actually running wherever you want to be able to run it as well. So it gives you the option, that flexibility, that if you want to run SQL PaaS, it doesn't just have to be in Azure. And then we have other things as well. So the ability to be able to manage holistically my Kubernetes clusters. So I may have AKS running in Azure, but I may also have GKE, which is running in Google Cloud. And I want to be able to manage both of those together as well, as if they're a seamless backplane, a control plane to be able to manage all of those. And that's really what Azure Arc is there to be able to do, is to basically make this as simple as possible for people. So as a developer, you may not worry too much about Azure Arc because you just want your software to run as resiliently as possible. Doesn't really matter where it is. But actually with Azure Arc, we're trying to, again, fix a problem that we've heard from our customers to be able to make the whole organization as easy as possible to be able to run. And so we talked about the serverless element of compute here, and this is where we start talking about App Service, Azure Functions, and Azure Kubernetes Service. Azure App Service was one of the first Azure services that went live when Azure opened, and it's also one of the most popular as well. The ability to be able to essentially just give your compiled artifact to App Service and just say, just go and run it with this version of the framework, the ability to be able to scale your infrastructure up and down as is needed based on thresholds, CPU utilization, memory utilization, for example. It allows you to be able to worry about the code, and it allows Azure and Microsoft to worry about making sure that that's running and is available as well. And some really nice features within Azure App Service as well. So the idea of slots. So I can basically do a production deployment into an Azure App Service, and I can do a flick a switch, and I can move from the production system into the pre-production slot, check everything is okay, that the telemetry is still all good. If it's not, I can switch back literally at the flick of the switch. It allows me to be able to actually do things really, really simply. And all I have to worry about is writing that code and deploying that as well. And it has full integration with things like Azure DevOps for deployment. We have SSL and TLS endpoint protection as well. So if you have a SSL certificate, just attach it there and we will host it for you. The ability to scale your infrastructure up and scale it down without having to worry about the underlying disks, load balancers, networking configuration, and those types of things as well. As I said, App Service is one of those things that has huge growth within Microsoft, and really is where a lot of customers go when they're developing applications. I would say from a technical perspective, if you think about if you're deploying a multi-component application into App Service, it is possible. You have multiple app instances running those different components, but actually you may then start getting to a level of complexity, kind of spaghettiing everything together. And so if you have kind of almost like a monolithic application or a single deployment artifact, App Service works really well for that. And it just simplifies everything for you to be able to actually, as I said, get on with writing good code. Azure Functions is really, I'm a really big fan of Azure Functions. It basically saves you so much money. It's just insane. Scott Guthrie was over in the UK about a year ago, and he was talking about a company who was spending something like upwards of $70,000 a month by running end-of-day application, end-of-day ETL processes on virtual machines. They converted where it was applicable as much of that as they could to Azure Functions and went down to something ridiculous like $800 a month. The ability for Azure Functions is that you give it a discrete piece of code, something which is either event-driven, so something which you receive a message on a queue, or an image has been saved into Azure Blob Storage, for example. That will trigger your Azure function, which will go pick up that image, do a resize, or run some AI or ML on it, and will then do something with that and place it and then update a row in a database, for example. There's simple elements where you really are paying for a consumption-based model where something happens and it's event-driven, my application runs, and then it stops, and I only get billed for when that actually executes. It's really, really powerful. What I would say about Azure Functions is that whilst it's fantastic on paper, you can't take a 2 million line 2 million source code lines of work of an application and pull all of that over to Azure Functions. It's fit for purpose when it is fit for purpose. In terms of the languages, this is not just Microsoft programming languages that it supports. You can run Python, I think I've got this right now, Python, Node.js, Java as well within Azure Functions. So, it's where the developers need to be able to write this software as well. Actually, one thing, just want to go back to Azure App Service. One feature of Azure App Service, which is really nice, whilst it allows you to be able to run things like Java, PHP, .NET, for example, you can essentially bring whatever you want to App Service because it gives you the ability to be able to say, just go and run this container for me. So anything that you can put into a container, you can also deploy into Azure App Service as well. And that's both on Windows and on Linux. So AKS. Kubernetes is one of those things, and you get this kind of maybe every 5 or 10 years in the IT industry, which seems to be permeating kind of everything. If the answer is Kubernetes, it's the answer to every question essentially. Kubernetes is really good. It came out of Google. It's the way that Google runs all of their workloads, but it's the ability. When I have a single container, it's really easy for me to be able to run a single container. I just log into a virtual machine and do Docker run, and my container is running. The problem is that applications, especially large complex applications, don't usually come as a single container. They usually come as 5, 10, 15, 20 or 30 or 100 different components to all microservices that need to be orchestrated together. And that's what Kubernetes is. It's an orchestrator of containers. The great thing about Kubernetes is that once I've deployed my container and I basically said, I need you to run 3 of these containers at all times, and I need it to be stitched together with an IP address, Kubernetes, to the best of its ability, will make sure that that is always the case. So even if an underlying virtual machine in your Kubernetes cluster goes down, Kubernetes will just reschedule those workloads onto wherever it can fit within your Kubernetes cluster. And this idea of it being resilient by default and it essentially having a control loop that makes sure that your cluster is doing exactly what you said, that you have declared essentially, is something which is really powerful. The ability to be able to logically segment your developers, having into namespaces, so production versus pre-production, or dev team 1 versus dev team 2, is really, really powerful actually, because it allows you to just say, look, your development environment is Kubernetes, and we will basically operationalize that for you. But as a developer, you go ahead and you just knock your socks off, just go and work within your Kubernetes developer cluster. And once you finish doing that, commit into GitHub, for example, run a pipeline in Azure DevOps, build a Docker container, push it up into Azure Container Registry, and then deploy that container or that update into your Kubernetes cluster, replacing one workload, version 1 of the workload, with version 2 of the workload. And that cycle can just continue going round and round and round. The thing which I really like about containers is that if you've got your inner loop sorted out correctly as a developer, you could do all of your software development on your laptop, have Minikube or a small Kubernetes cluster running on your laptop, and have an exact replica of what's running in production with all of the other workloads running side by side. Do your local testing, and once you know that that Docker container is correct with a Docker file which actually states how to be able to build it, you are absolutely guaranteed that what was running on your laptop is exactly as what's going to be running in production. I used to work in financial services before I came to Microsoft, and it would be all hands to the pump on a Sunday night when we had to deploy applications and updates to applications for the markets to open on a Monday morning. And the thing which basically slowed us down, and the thing which actually impacted risk more than anything else, was the old saying of, well, it worked on our system, why is it not working in production? And Docker containers and containers in general were written specifically to be able to resolve that problem, and it massively mitigates that risk for shipping into production, knowing that what you developed is exactly what's running in production. And AKS is Kubernetes, but it's a managed service within Azure. We also support Red Hat OpenShift as well, which is Red Hat's version of Kubernetes, and is much more kind of geared around the day 2 operations of Kubernetes. Both of those are managed services. That basically means that we run the control plane for you, and the virtual machines, which are actually your Kubernetes cluster, are within your Microsoft subscription or tenant, and you only pay for those virtual machines. From a Red Hat OpenShift perspective, you pay a per hour cost to be able to run the Red Hat software, and that comes off your standard billing as well. So we give you both options really. If you want to go with vanilla Kubernetes and you've built up your kind of end-to-end pipeline, go with AKS. If you want something which is much more enterprise grade and supported by both Microsoft and Red Hat, top to tail, then go with Arrow as well. And we support both of those. From a PaaS database perspective, I used to be an Oracle DBA many years ago, and it was one of the worst jobs that I ever had in my life. I hope there aren't any Oracle DBAs on the call. I'm much more of a developer, and from a developer perspective, I don't want to have to worry about table spaces. I don't have to worry about how am I going to do my backups. I don't really want to worry about what is the resilient architecture that I'm using for my databases. And so obviously we have PaaS databases. We own SQL, we wrote SQL database. So of course we have that sewn up in terms of being a PaaS database service, but we also support the open source databases as well. So Postgres, MySQL, and Maria are there as PaaS services. So if you're used to those databases, they are there as managed services, as you would expect. And then we come on to Cosmos DB, which is non-relational. It's a document database, but it's multi-model. So it means that I can see a representation of my data that I require to be able to actually do my work. So we support Mongo, Cassandra, I think Gremlin as well from a graph perspective. The ability to just have that and the ability to be able to actually replicate that data globally as well is something that if you're running an application that has to be in multiple locations, the ability to be able to write once and read many from different replicas is there, and is just inherently built into a Cosmos DB. And then as we're getting to the end of the services that we have here, you've written your code, you are running it on one of our compute services, you have your data which is stored into one of the data services as well. But then how about starting to add some intelligence into that? I said that we spend a lot of money on our Azure data centers, which we do. We spend an equally large amount of money on our AI side of things as well with our Microsoft research team. Really developing state-of-the-art AI models for things like speech recognition, image recognition, language understanding, language translation, and the list goes on and on and on. And this is somewhere, again, that we are innovating in and dedicated to innovating in as much as possible. The ability for me to be able to speak into the microphone and for Microsoft to be able to transcode that into text allows me as a programmer to then, and with language understanding, allows me to actually start writing intelligent bots and things like that, where I don't have to worry about, well, how do I do text to speech? Or it's like, well, it's already done for you and it's a PaaS service and allows you to be able to work with. The ability to be able to upload terabytes worth of images and to be able to categorize those into this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a gerbil, if that's the application that you were writing, or the ability to be able to upload forms and actually have Azure take the data and do object character recognition to be able to pull information out of those forms as well. Now, there are lots of things that these types of services allows you to be able to do that would literally take people years, upwards of 1,000 people years, but Microsoft's just got it there as a pay-as-you-go service. Now, that's not to say that you're constrained just by the Azure AI models. You can also change those AI models. You can retrain them as well. For our text-to-speech languages, for example, you can actually read a load of text out and get it to mimic your voice or the voice of someone else if you wanted to. Ethically, obviously, there are lots of things that we work on there so that you've got to say that it's a computer-generated voice, but it allows you to be able to actually train our existing models to be able to do something which would just be really nearly impossible for you to be able to do if you're doing it by yourself. And so being able to augment the applications that you've written with AI, with the kind of real world interaction, which is one of the main reasons that AI exists, is something which actually allows you to start to be really, really innovative in terms of what you're actually delivering. So that was a whistle-stop tour really in terms of Azure, PaaS services, how you deploy your applications as well. I will leave you with kind of the mission that Microsoft has, which is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. It's difficult sometimes when you're kind of in the weeds of things to be able to just look and say, well, I'm writing code or I'm developing a specific application for a specific customer or for an industry. But actually what cloud is allowing, what developers and what cloud and what things like AI is allowing people to be able to do is to really kind of change the entire way that we think about the world and to be able to make people's lives as simple as possible. And so we're here as Microsoft, as well as Grey Matter as well, to help you on that journey. And we will do and strive our best, as it is the Microsoft mission, to be able to make sure that we empower you to be able to do that. So thank you very much indeed. I think I'm just about on time. I'm just not sure if there's any questions to be able to answer.
Looks like there's one question in the Q&A. Justin, I'm not sure if you can do otherwise.
Okay, yeah. What sort of support? Okay, so the question is, what sort of support for Golang is looking to be implemented into Azure Functions? So we have a Golang team within Microsoft. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can definitely find that out for you. My understanding is that we are working on it. It's just when it either goes into preview or GA is what I'll need to get back to you. But I can definitely find that out. It really wouldn't be, it's not one of those things that I would think, oh, Golang, that would be weird. Why would we be supporting it? I know that we have a lot of people who are actually working on it. So yeah, leave that with me and somehow I will try and get that message back to you. Great. Listen, I just want to say thank you very much to Grey Matter as well for, I know that they've had to work pretty quickly to be able to move this from a very large live event, an in-person event, to being virtual. So thank you very much for kind of turning this around really quickly. To everyone else on the call, I hope the rest of the session, I hope you've enjoyed all of the sessions that have been here today. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of the sessions this afternoon as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your time and session. It looks like we've actually had another question.
Oh, yeah. Azure App Service. So the question is, Azure App Service for containers, is it planned to support changing configurations on the container host? E.g., the famous SonarQube Docker container requires such changes. configuration in the host. On the host, so the underlying host for App Service, at the moment, no. I'm not aware of it being on the roadmap either. But again, if you could leave your email address, I can definitely go and find out where that roadmap is for sure.
Okay, great stuff. So if any, so again, thank you, Justin, for your time and your delivery. Any further questions? If you please email info@greymatter.com. Feel free to give us a call on the number on screen, or additionally, as I said at the top of this session, join our LinkedIn partner community, so Grey Matter ISV partner community, to ask questions and engage with the speakers from today, as well as one another as ISVs within our partner community. When it comes to Azure, there's two main services that we're offering to those on the call today. For those that already are consuming Azure, Matt mentioned in our keynote this morning our Azure cost analysis service. So we work with you to understand the resources you're currently utilising and the most cost-effective way to deliver those into your business. And then the other services for those that are net new to Azure is actually Discovery Workshop. So work with you to understand what the design looks like and what those most appropriate resources look like into Azure. If any of those are of interest to you, please do feel to reach out. But we will be following up with the recordings of the session, but also in terms of details of those services.